always take the most interesting path available to you. I think when you do that, you just put yourself in like interesting situations. And I've always just sort of tried to do what I think is the most interesting job on the table and go to the places where I think interesting people are going to congregate. And it's worked out for me. And I don't know that I've had much of a better plan than to show up and try to work hard.
Welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. We're here to bring you the latest and greatest from the Silicon Valley, where unicorns roam and innovation never sleeps. We've got top investors, superstar founders, and well-known tech executives lined up to share their secrets on building and investing in successful companies. Just a quick disclaimer, while we may sound like financial geniuses, but please don't mistake us for your friendly neighborhood financial advisors. So let's get started and dive into the wild world of tech entrepreneurship. Our sponsor, Alumni Ventures, offers individual investors access to venture investing through its diversified, professional-grade venture portfolios. The company's funds have consistently outperformed public market equivalents with over $1.1 billion raised and invested in over 1,100 portfolio companies. They have a dedicated team of 50 full-time venture investors and were the #1 most active venture firm in the US in 2022 and #3 globally according to PitchBook. Investing in venture capital can help reduce the overall portfolio risk and increase the likelihood of stronger returns. To learn more, visit av.vc/grace, that's av.vc/grace, and schedule a call. Investors must be accredited. Please note that all financial investments involve risk. Past performance does not guarantee future results, and it is important to conduct your own research and seek professional advice before making any investment decisions. Now, please enjoy the show. Hi, Charles. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Finally.
I'm so glad we can make this happen. I've been really looking forward to it.
I have been such a huge fan, and I listened to like just a ton of your past podcasts before. I saw that you went on like Jason Calacanis, and then you also went on his pitch panel, like some of like the most interesting comments or like interviews you've done. And I just felt like I'm such a big fan. I noticed that you were originally from like Detroit, Michigan, and then later on you went to Stanford, and then you work at Excite Home. Yeah, I have another guest who used to work at Excite Home, Charles Model. He used to work at Excite Home. And then, so like I saw on your resume, I was like, oh, connecting the dots. And then you work at In-Q-Tel, which is like the CIA venture capital arm, which is like super legendary. Definitely want to chat about that. And then you work with Jeff Clavier, like Encore. And then he also went on the show before. And basically, I feel like you have the most interesting life experience. And then now you're like the board chair of like MVCA, and then you're teaching a course at Stanford. You have your own fund. You're definitely someone like I just really, really look up to. And to start the show, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about what would be like one experience in your life that you feel like kind of like change your life trajectory and kind of like make the big impact in your life.
Oh, I think that's easy. There are two things that happened. They're related. One was I took what was then a random internship at a company called Excite before we'd even merged with that home. When I was in college, mostly because I was really curious about the internet and I wanted to work at, I literally was like, just wanted to work at an internet company and figure out like, how does this stuff all work on the inside? And I really, really enjoyed my time at Excite. It was really fun. And while I was there, I met this woman, Amy Chan, and Amy sort of took me under her wing and was like, hey, my husband is he's running this venture capital fund for the CIA. He could use some help. I think you should go interview with him. Because I didn't even know what venture capital was. But I trusted Amy, and I ended up working for Gilman at In-Q-Tel. And so I think if I hadn't ended up at Excite, I probably wouldn't have met Amy. If I hadn't met Amy, I probably wouldn't have met Gilman. If I hadn't met Gilman, I wouldn't have ended up at In-Q-Tel. And I'd probably be doing something very different than what I'm doing today. So I think sometimes in life, you really never know where serendipity is going to come from, or what are the little micro decisions that you're going to make that are going to have a huge impact on your life.
You kind of like say it's luck or like kind of like, you know, serendipity, but I also feel like you must have some characteristic that kind of make you really special for her to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to refer you to my husband and then like, you know, getting on this career journey. what would you say are your unfair advantage or kind of like characteristic that you feel like you have that make you more successful than like your peers?
I really have always struggled to answer this question. Here's what I can tell you is like my philosophy for these things, and it's worked
Mm,
well for me. One is
mm,
like always take the most interesting path available to you.
mm,
So when it came time to take a job when I was graduating from Stanford, my options were Goldman Sachs, some of the big consulting firms, In-Q-Tel, and I had some other offers from like very in the moment late 90s tech companies.
mhm,
And I remember thinking to myself, like, Goldman is a really high prestige job.
mhm,
Like it's a really high prestige. My parents will be
mhm,
very proud of me if I tell
mhm,
them I work at Goldman Sachs in New York City, no less.
mhm,
But I was like, this In-Q-Tel thing is probably never going to come around again for me. If
mm,
I don't do this now, I'm never going to get a shot at the chance to work for the CI's venture capital fund. And I think these other jobs I'm looking at will kind of be available to me later in my career. So I'm going to take the like kind of risky, interesting thing.
mm,
And I think when you do that, you just put yourself in like interesting situations.
mm,
So that's one. Two, I've always been really curious about how every place that I work, how does it function? Like, how does work get done? And at
mhm.
Excite, I was very curious. So I just kind of like floated around and like got to know people and was like, what do you do? I'm 21. I'm trying to figure out what do you do? Oh, you're in marketing. What do you do all day as a marketer? Oh, you're in biz dev. What do you do all day? And I just tried to meet really awesome people when I was at Excite.
Mhm,
Like that was a big part of what I wanted to do. And I ended up meeting some like amazing people who went on to be venture capitalists and executives like Jeff Donaker, who was at Yelp and is now at Burst. Raj Kapoor, who was at Mayfield and is now at
mhm,
Climactic, Brett Bullington, like all of these, Joe Kraus, who I later ended up crossing paths with again at Google. Like there were just all these amazing people that I met there. And I've always just sort of tried to do what I think is the most interesting job on the table and go to the places where I think interesting people are going to congregate. And it's worked out for me. And I don't know that I've had much of a better plan than that than to show up and try to work hard.
mm. I definitely love that. I feel like picking something or like some people that are like interesting to work with, it's like definitely like leading you to like a really unique path. And I'm curious, like speaking of meeting people, like you just mentioned about like Amy or like some other people from like maybe Jeff from Encore. So like you met a lot of really smart people. I'm curious, who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to career development in venture?
It's a really great question. It's evolved a lot over time.
Mhm,
I think when I was first getting started with the fund, there's a lot of people who gave me
mhm,
good advice. I'd say that advice was mostly about starting a fund. So
mhm,
Jeff, obviously, Clave was super helpful. Brad Feld was really helpful. Roger Ehrenberg was really
mhm,
helpful. Nahal and ENIAC was really helpful. There were a lot of people who were really helpful in the getting started phase.
mhm,
Now I have actually like all of those people are still really helpful to me. Plus, I have this new set of people who are helping me think about, well, what do you do when you're no longer an emerging manager
mhm,
and you start thinking about the future of your firm? That's like a different set of people who've been helpful
mhm,
to me. That's like Teresa at Accrue and Kirsten Green and Maha at Kanan and Scott Sandell. There's a bunch of people who've been like very helpful to me on this new set of challenges I have because for the first couple of funds, the whole thing is like, how do I just not go out of business? How do I
yeah,
simply
totally.
survive? And now I'm like, okay, well, we've solved for surviving. What do we do now to turn Precursor into the kind of place I want it to be? And I've sort of had to expand the circle of people that I talk to. Hunter
Mhm.
and Satya at Homebrew also have been insanely helpful to me in thinking these things through. And I think everybody has to like find their own path.
Totally. I'm curious, like, how do you kind of like keep this really high caliber network? And like, what do you feel like make you like so like, succeed so fast than a lot of other people? Because I look at your career track, like you are, right now the board chair of MVCA and then you're teaching at Stanford. A lot of these things are like people, even other VCs are really aspiring to do. How do you kind of like build a network, also like maintain this level of like network?
So I have like a habit of saying, there's all these books, just say no to everything, the year of no. Like there's,
The year
look, I
of
think if you really,
no.
I think if you really want to protect your time and you
Mhm.
have other things in your life that are really important to you, you have to like do that. I am a chronic say yes person,
Mhm.
maybe to a fault. So the nice thing, the bad thing about saying yes is you're always busy. And some days you look up, you're like, oh no, I committed to be on the board of this thing or to help this
Mhm.
person with this thing. And you wonder like when I'm going to have time for myself. But so many of the really great things in my life have happened from just like saying yes to opportunities that were offered to me. And even sometimes I'm like, I'm not really sure how I have time to do this thing,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna make time to do it.
Mhm.
Like that's how I started teaching at Stanford. Fern Mandelbaum from Emerson and I had met, and I really admired her just as a person. And she invited me to come down and spend some time learning about this class she was teaching.
Mhm.
And she was like, you should join my teaching team. And I was like, I don't have any time to teach a class at Stanford. I have no time. I'm trying to build my firm from scratch. I don't have any time to do this.
Mhm.
But I was like, this is a really cool opportunity. I think something good will come from this. So instead of saying I don't have time to teach at Stanford, I'm like, I'm going to find time to fit teaching into Stanford into the rest of my life and schedule.
Mhm.
It's not easy, but it's been such a good learning and like growth experience for me. I can't imagine where I'd be if I hadn't done it. So I was like,
Totally.
sometimes you just have to like make the decision that this is really important and I'm going to find a way to fit this thing
Mhm.
into my life.
Totally. I mean, like, although you're mentioning like it's hard to find time to do this thing, but I feel like the thing you mentioned are also super exciting opportunities.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious, like, you have done startups on your own and then you have raised funding for your fund. Like, what would you say is like one skill that you're constantly trying to get better at? It could be like maybe soft skill like sales or like technical skill like coding. What would you say is like one thing that you are trying to constantly getting better?
Honestly, the thing I'm always trying to get better at is communication.
Mm.
I think all sales is about communication. And when I say communication, it's not just what I say, it's
Mhm.
my ability to interpret what other people are feeling and
Mm.
what they secretly or not so secretly need, want, or expect from me.
Mhm.
And it turns out if you think about like most of my job is communication.
Mm.
It's like talking to limited partners about why our fund is amazing and why they should trust venture capital. It's convincing founders that we
Mhm.
haven't invested in that they should give us a shot at being on their cap table. It's convincing founders that we've already worked with that if I have a point of view about a key decision they're going to make, that they should listen to and value my opinion and input.
Mhm.
All of that's community. I have people who work here at Precursor who I want to like help them grow in their career. Most of my job is communication. I actually don't do much other than communicate with other people all day long. And I feel like there's no end. Like I'm not as good at that as I want to be. At least once a day, I have a conversation, I replay in my head. I'm like, I could have done a much better job with that conversation. And I wish I could have it back, but you can't. It's probably the thing I spend the most time thinking about.
Wow, I feel like that's so on point because being an investor, you have to constantly selling yourself to like your LPs and then like to the best founders. And then just like every day you have to also like basically communicate or like convincing your employees this is the best place to work. And like I feel like all of these takes a lot of communicating and then just like overall mind reading or just everything along the line with like human interaction. And although I feel like you're already really good, I don't really know if you still need to practice or anything. So you started Precursor 7 years ago, or maybe almost 8 years ago, until maybe next April. And then you've worked in venture 8 years ago before that in Encore. And I'm curious, what are something that you took from working in Encore that you took to starting your own firm?
A lot of things. So one thing I learned really quickly just from working with Jeff is if you want to be the managing partner of your own firm, you're
Mhm.
kind of going to work like a dog.
Mm.
It's a lot of work because when I joined him, he was a solo GP. Before that was like really a cool thing to do.
Mhm.
And like it's just a lot of work when you are the one person IR, finance,
Mhm.
investing, portfolio company. Like it's just a lot of work to get one of these things to take off
Started. Mhm.
and started. And it's still a lot of work to kind of keep it airborne, to use a flight analogy. Second, so that's a big one, is it takes a lot of
Mhm.
work. Another big one I took away from my time at Encore is I think there's a lot of founders who don't get a lot of honest, direct feedback from people in their lives, whether it's
Mhm.
their management teams
Mhm.
or their investors or even their co-founder. And finding a way to deliver honest feedback to people in a way that they can hear it can literally change the trajectory of a company.
Mhm.
And this is why I think I've been so focused on communication, is the
Mhm.
ability to like see something that a founder doesn't see. But in order to get them to see it, you have to be able to help them see it. You can't
Mhm.
just tell them, look over here. Then like, I don't see what you're, and just that skill of the ability to like
Mhm.
have influence with founders is something that like I really learned. The other thing I learned, Grace, is it takes a very long time to start to see the fruits of your labor in this business. And
Mhm.
it, as much as people talk about it being a long game, it's even longer than most long games. It really
I feel
is.
you. I
If you're
feel
doing
you.
pre-seed and seed investing,
Mhm.
you're really you won't conceive that there's a world in which you won't see the returns from your best early investments for 10 to 12 years.
Totally. I think like one thing I want to zoom in is like you mentioned like, see things the founder don't see and then kind of like helping them realize like a vision that you saw in the company. Can you give us an example of like, what were something that like maybe Jeff or maybe you said to a founder and then that kind of like changed the company trajectory?
I won't name the specific company, but
Mhm.
I remember this very clearly. We had a marketplace company that was growing revenue,
Mhm.
and they had sent them like an email update. And Jeff wrote back and kind of was like, "Hey, I think you guys have like a leaky bucket problem in your
Mhm.
marketplace because we contracted with somebody on the marketplace and we kind of like just as a trial balloon tried to see if they'd go off platform and they were like instantly said yes. So I worry that like this is an anecdotal experience, but I think this is worth us digging into.
Mhm.
And it literally changed the way we priced the service. We realized that upon closer inspection, many of the best participants in this marketplace on the supply side would like disappear over time.
Mhm.
And what we realized is that the take rate we were asking for the first visit or the first interaction probably made sense. But at some point, those people started to think of that customer as their customer.
Mhm.
They're like, well, why am I paying you the same transaction take rate
Mhm.
for the fifth or sixth interaction with this person? That doesn't feel fair.
Mhm.
And so we went in, the company went in and ended up revamping its pricing such that the more interactions you had with somebody, the less the platform took. And it
Mhm.
really impacted the trajectory of that business. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure when we would have gotten to that conclusion or when we would have gotten to the exploratory work to find the answer to that question
Mhm.
if Jeff hadn't sort of like prompted that founder to look into that.
Mhm.
And it ended up being a very consequential change to the business model and the company's trajectory.
Mhm. I love that story. I feel like doing due diligence and then also like helping a company grow is not just like, helping people recruit or like doing something on the surface level to help them, but like also just like also dig deeper or like actually I guess like monitoring like how they're growing. It's also really important.
Yep.
Um I'm curious, like, when you're raising your first fund, I remember you were saying this in another interview that you maybe talked to like 200 investors and that like after that, like, when you were raising the second fund, you thought it's gonna be easier, but also like really hard. And then luckily you met someone in the elevator and then they gave
Yeah.
you half of the second fund, which I thought was really cool and legendary. And I'm curious, like when you're raising your own fund, how do you kind of like mentally set up this schedule in your head? Like, you quit a really good job from this well-known firm and then like you left to do your own thing. Like what were the 2 year look like for you to, even meeting these people, getting them to invest in you? It's probably really tough conversations at the beginning, especially. How do you kind of like do it? And then like if you're doing it today, like how would you do it again?
One thing I realized is in order to fundraise for a fund, you have to
Mhm.
actually have done it. You have to do it. And, I was in the room for a lot of fundraising meetings at Encore, but I wasn't leading them. I wasn't giving the pitch. Jeff gave the pitch. So like I was in the room and I got to like hear it, but I didn't have to do it. And doing and observing and raising money for a venture fund are two very different things. Very different things. Because when you're the person pitching, you've got to build the narrative in your head. You've got to have all the counters ready to go when it's time to think about, well, when they say this, what about that? You've got to have the whole thing kind of mapped out in your head. And I think the hardest thing, and I tell a lot of the emerging managers that I try to help, I think everybody thinks their story sounds really differentiated when they say it in their own words. When you hear it from the point of view of an LP, you're like, oh, let me guess, you're like another smart person, a good network we should give money to because you're smart. And you're like, you know what? That's actually not that differentiated. And like what I didn't realize when I started fundraising is the sort of like, why does the world need another venture fund answer for Precursor was not well articulated. Like I knew the answer. I didn't know how to spit it out in a very short, to the point, memorable way. And I think it took me about well over 100 pitches before I figured out something's not working. And sometimes when you're a solo GP, what you miss out on in a pitch is you miss out on the ability of somebody else who's on your side to be an observer and say, hey, here's where you lost that person. Or, hey, I noticed when you went down this road, you kind of didn't go. Because you're pitching, you can't both like pitch and be in the moment of pitching and be fully observant of what's going on around you. At least I can't. Maybe other people can. I can't.
I feel like you are such an articulate person, and that I actually really like your firm's thesis, and which is like, investing in, I wouldn't call it like the underdog, but like I feel like you don't really care about like their pedigree or like, have they worked at Google or like went to Stanford or Harvard, and then you are selecting them based on like, not based on their past, but based on like what you can predict in their future. And then do this person have like CEO quality? Like, can they be a good CEO when they're in the spot? Instead of like, have they been a good CEO in the past? So I really like those theses, but like, I feel like pitching them to an investor, like for people to give you money, it's like a really different story, right? Let's say like after you pitch so many LPs, you probably assuming you're investing in your friend's fund or something too. So curious, like when you're looking at your own pitch, like what are, let's say, 3 things that you would highlight to attract someone? Also, I think when you started like this stage, having small check to write to back someone when they're in very earlier stages, like probably don't exist, but like now it's like really popular, solo GP everywhere on Twitter. How do you kind of like navigate the entire like building a fund situation nowadays compared to like when you first started?
There's so much I could cover. I do think it's wild. When I first started, everyone's like, pre-seed is the adverse selection backwater of seed. There's like no good companies here. Like nobody should raise a pre-seed fund. Now, when I talk to LPs, there's so many pre-seed funds. Why should we pick you? So a lot changed in a short period of time. But one thing I will say is, and this is, I think, sales 101 that I failed at when I started fundraising. It's very important if you're going to ask somebody for money, you have to understand the context that they're bringing to the table. And what I didn't fully grasp at Precursor was how much orthodoxy there is among the LP community about what works. And I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying there are some widely held beliefs that had I really understood how widely and deeply held they were, I would have had a greater appreciation for how hard my fundraise was going to be. If you ask most LPs what works in early stage, a couple of partners because decision-making with a group is better. I don't have that. A concentrated portfolio with high ownership. I don't have that. Some amount of support and services. Don't have that either. And I underestimated how radical the idea of a single GP doing 80 to 100 companies per fund, buying relatively modest ownership stakes was for most LPs. But the funny thing was, I was like, well, this is what we were doing at Encore before we grew
Mhm.
up. This is what SV Angel,
Mhm.
like this is what Iden did at Felicia's. Like there were all of these like examples of people who had done it before. But a lot of LPs were like, the thing you're telling me you're building is the literal opposite of what I think works.
Mhm.
And if someone had told me you should go ahead and do this, just be aware that you're literally telling people that like the earth is flat, effectively. Like,
Mhm.
and it took me a long time I was like, why am I getting so much resistance to the idea of precursors? Like, what am I doing wrong? And finally I was like, oh, what I'm doing wrong is the core hypotheses and beliefs I have for this fund are at odds with what most LPs who back VCs think works. And it's
Mhm.
very, very, very hard to get people to buy into something that is literally at odds with what they think success looks like. And once I realized like this is the kind of like crazy dynamic situation that I'm up against, I have to have a much, much, much better pitch because I don't tick any of the boxes strategy wise that LPs, and it really Grace forced me to like level up the storytelling on Precursor. And I said, if you're going to go ask people to believe something that's basically at odds with what they think works, it has to be a really good story. It can't be an
Mhm.
okay story. It can't be a good story. It has to be an exceptional story. And you have to find people who are willing to at least explore something that they're not sure they believe.
Mm. Can I ask you, like, what is your, like, let's say a 30-second pitch today?
Yeah, I've given this literally thousands of times. And I came up with this basically after a terrible pitch.
Mm.
So what I tell people when I'm pitching Precursor is like, listen, there's thousands of seed stage venture capital firms. If you are a repeat founder, or
Mhm.
if you're a founder who's socially or professionally connected to VCs, you went to Stanford or Harvard, you worked at Google, you're actually pretty well served in terms of
Mhm.
capital. You
Mm.
can raise money on an idea. You don't need traction. Now, let's say you don't know a lot of VCs, but you've got traction. There's some set of people who will take a meeting because they could get their arms around the product. What do you do if you don't know anybody and you don't have traction? So I just started asking LPs, who do you know who routinely funds people that are outside of their immediate network and aren't warm introed in, who don't have traction? I'm just like, you can take away one of those things and you can name
Mhm.
a bunch of firms. I'm asking you to take away both. And a lot of LPs would be like, not really, maybe a couple of angels I know, but like there aren't really any firms I know
Mhm.
who do it that way. And I was like, well, I think we're missing out on a huge untapped pool of entrepreneurial talent. And what I tell them is that I'm not trying to second guess the decisions of True and First Round and Uncork and Freestyle. I'm not trying to say, oh, these founders that you passed on, I
Mhm.
have a different view of them. I'm meeting all these people that are never going to get in those rooms because those people are competing with the highly referenced, highly connected, highly referred in. And the gravity for most venture capital firms is to follow to follow the highly referred, warm introed, close connection people. And I'm like, those people are going to get funded.
Mm.
That there's a lot of competition to fund those people. Nobody's looking over here. So all you have to believe is that there's some value over here. If there's some value over here, let me tell you why I think we're the right firm to go find it.
Mm.
And most LPs were just like, I don't know anybody else who's doing this. I'm like, okay, now that I have my own lane, we can talk about whether this is a good lane to be in. But
Mm.
before Grace, the problem I had was everyone's like, well, there's like 1,000 generalist seed firms. Like, why should I fund another? And I'm like, whenever you have that problem, well, no matter what you're selling, you have a real problem. I was like, oh, you guys think these funds are basically commodities. They're all, and I get it. If every committee meeting is like, I met this person, they're great, they're super smart, and they know everyone, you'd be like, every week I get pitched one of these, just a different face on the screen. Why should I do any of them? What makes this one different from the one last week or the one we're going to get next week?
I love the pitch, and I'm curious, like, what are some setbacks that you would face when you're pitching the story? I think I love the inventing your own lane. I do believe in that lane. How do you kind of like go to that lane? Like, how do you kind of like create your own benchmark to meet these people? Besides, like, I know that you're investing heavily on female founders, and there are a lot of people who are, for example, your associate, they're also like diverse people coming from like different backgrounds. So basically, I do feel like I understand, like, from like observing from outside of your firm, I can see that, but I'm curious, like, how do you kind of like find really differentiate companies to start to be
Yeah.
with?
So it's funny. A lot of LPs are like, well, how do you source? I'm like,
Mhm.
it's actually easy to be top of mind for people if there's not many firms like yours.
Mm,
And what I tell people is like, because I'm willing to meet people before they have traction and before they have evidence, a lot of people send me deals because they're like, this thing is too early for me. And it's easy to stay top of mind when you're one of the
mhm,
only people that they think of to do that. And so the other thing I will say about venture firms is most of the things that I've learned about Precursor and why it works were not obvious to me before I started. They only became obvious once I started, like any startup. I was like, oh, here's a perfect example, Grace. A lot of LPs would be like, well, it's so many companies. And I'm like, oh, you think that's a bug? I think it's a feature.
mm,
Like, so many companies. I'm like, yeah, you know what that means? Almost any question that a founder has, I can find them a peer who's gone through it recently and can give them probably a better tactical in the weeds answer than I can. And the more founders we have, the more coverage we have for any problem that any founder is going to ever encounter. So how is that not a good thing? Oh, well, it's so many people to get to know. I'm like, but if you can get to know them, that's so many more people out in the community meeting other founders and sending you great deals. So I'm like, but I realized like everything that like LPs thought was a bug, I was like, it's probably a feature. And I would tell them, I was like, don't you think Bookface for YC is a feature? YC has so many founders that like they know across thousands of companies what's it like to deal with Precursor. I've never seen it. There's a page that'll tell you like,
mhm,
and because YC has so many founders, founders can sell to each other. Like the network becomes,
mhm,
I tell like guys, networks become valuable with density and size.
mm,
And so like what I thought was like, we're trying to build a very intentional founder community that has where these sort of entrance attributes are different. But we've funded 700 or 800 founders at this point.
mhm,
It's very rare that something comes up where I say I've never had anybody encounter this before.
mm,
Almost everything. Like I had somebody who's like, hey, my co-founder's going through a divorce and he's really distracted. I'm like, I got a couple of companies where that happened. I'm going to let you talk to the person. I can have you talk to someone who's going through the divorce, who went through a
mhm,
divorce, tell you what they wish their co-founder had done. I can introduce this other person whose co-founder went through a divorce and how they made. I'm like, I got like 5 people for you.
mm.
So no matter what the situation is, we almost always have somebody in the community. And you know what, Grace? There's so many things we're hearing the answer from another founder is like 100 times more valuable than me saying, well, 15 years ago when I built companies,
Mhm.
here's how we did things in the Stone Ages. That's just not as useful.
Mm,
It's just like not as useful. It's not what they want.
totally. Okay, so I have one more question in the fund side, and then we can talk about the company side. So basically, like you said, like raising a fund is very different than like, observing someone else raising a fund. When you first started, who do you ask for help, and how do you kind of line up these LPs to talk to in the first place? Especially when solo GP wasn't really a thing. I've seen people like, DMing everybody on Twitter these days and then raising a
Yeah.
fund that way. But I'm curious, like when you're doing it, how do you like tactically, how do you do it?
In the beginning, I was afraid to ask people for help. I was like, I'm supposed to figure this out on my own. Then I realized like you're not. You're actually supposed to ask for help.
Mhm,
So I started asking a few people, like Mark Suster gave me some really good advice. Mike Maples. I started just going to the other people who I knew had started or taken
mhm,
over or were running firms. And I was like, here's what I'm pitching. What do you think? Some of them are like, this sounds like a terrible idea, but I'll help you anyway. Um, and then I started asking people, like, what kind of LPs do you think would be right for a fund like mine?
mhm,
And I got really good feedback. Some people were like, well, this is the kind of LP that we think would be awesome for your fund. Other people were like, I don't know, just go meet people. And what I realized very quickly on was that we weren't a great fit for big institutions. Our first fund was only $15 million. It was too small for them. And what I realized in the end, though, was like the more people I pitched, the more LPs found me. Like one of our longest standing LPs was introduced to me by somebody who passed on my fund, but thought it was a pretty good idea, just wasn't right for them. And they introduced me to one of my most important LP relationships.
Mm,
And they didn't tell me. It took me a long time to figure out because the intro from the email came in cold.
mm.
It's like, wow, this is interesting. Cold. And it took me a while to figure out, oh, I met these people through this person who'd passed on our fund.
I really like what you said about like asking for help. Like, what kind of help do you ask? Do you ask them to hear your pitch, or do you just directly ask, hey, person A, can you introduce your LP to me? Like, what is the art of asking?
It's interesting. Some people, if you ask them for LP introductions, they get a little like, I don't know, they're my
Mm,
LPs.
mm,
It's sort of for some people, it's a big uncomfortable ask.
mm,
So what I tell people is like, I'm not going to ask you for introductions. I don't want to put you in that position. All I want is names of people you think I should find a way to get in front of. I will do all of the work of getting in front of them.
mm,
And I find that if I just tell people I just need top of funnel names to go research and figure out if they're a fit for us, you get more names because
mm,
then the person's not like, oh, I'm going to get 10 emails from Charles asking to introduce my 10 best LPs. And then at some point, people will just offer to intro you, like you'll just. But I think right now, one of the hardest things about starting a fund is I'd say most LPs are not really that into cold intro.
mm,
Most VCs aren't, but the tide in venture is shifting. I feel like I think most LPs are just uninterested in cold intro. Now I've seen some people like Eric at Contrary Tarzinski
mhm,
actually did really well with cold intro. Most people it doesn't work. Like it doesn't work for them. And so the people who can make the best intros for you are generally other GPs. So if you're a new manager from outside the ecosystem, it can be tough to break in because you just don't have the relationships with the GPs that have the relationships with the
mm.
LPs.
Another thing is like you have to also align their interests with yours in a way. Like, how do you kind of align that? I feel like it's kind of impossible unless you pay a really mega advisory fee or some sort. How, like, but you can't really do that with like 200 people, right? Like, so how do you kind of like make it efficient or like make other people's time valuable when they're like helping you?
One thing I learned, it's probably less true today. When I started Precursor, there weren't that many GPs that were doing pre-seed. And there were all of these LPs who were kind of curious about, is this pre-seed thing a real thing?
Mm,
And I realized, oh, I actually have something of value to offer them if they're willing to meet with me. I can tell them how I think pre-seed works, or I can give them my take on the landscape in the industry. And I'm probably one of a very small number of people who can actually do that.
mm,
So for a while, I was like, well, this is my calling card to get these meetings is not just a pitch, but an offer to share some of my insights and learnings about pre-seed with these LPs. And some of them were like, honestly, genuinely interested in what I had to say.
mm,
Now it's not that hard. There's lots of people can say about pre-seed.
mm,
So I will say, like, every time you start a fund, there's always something about that moment in time and situation that gives you an advantage if you look hard enough. And for me, I was like, our advantage is that like pre-seed is like not well understood and it's like not popular. So my opportunity is to like be the voice of pre-seed by being kind of like more open and willing to talk than anybody else.
mm. Totally. I like that you kind of like started a movement or like started like your own category of like educating the market of pre-seed. What is an opportunity today that's kind of like the equivalent of like a pre-seed?
Wow. I think about this a lot. I think I would say like there's always opportunity in doing like the really hard things that other people don't want to do. I'll tell you an experiment that I'm really interested in. I'm actually really interested in what the South Park Commons team is doing.
Mm,
They're doing some really interesting work because, like, at Precursor, we don't do a great job right now, candidly, with
hmm
people who don't have an idea,
hmm
but they know they want to start something and they need some time to figure it out. My pitch to them is like, you don't need traction, you need to build anything, but I need to know what I'm signing up to support you on. And if you need time to explore and figure out what that thing is, we're probably not the best. Like, I need you to do that work before you show up here.
hmm
We have limited capacity to do EIR programs. But I think what South Park Commons is trying to do with that sort of like pre-idea founder program is really interesting and really disruptive if you can get it right. Kind of is like structured exploration.
mm,
I think the best thing about a good EIR program, it should do two things. It should give you enough structure that you don't feel like you're all alone in the world. And like if you think about it, if you were going to start a company and you were just working in your bedroom, you're not really accountable to anybody
hmm
other than yourself. We've had EIRs and it's been a great program, but part of I think why it works is once a week or once every other week, they have to come tell me, here's what I've been working on and here's what I got done. Nobody wants to come to that meeting and say, I just played Xbox all day and I didn't do any work.
hmm
And so I think the ideation process, oftentimes for a lot of people, it needs some structure. And some of that structure is programming, and some of that
mm,
structure is accountability. And so I often think like, I wish we could figure out, given our resources and scale, how we could be a better partner for these sort of really talented pre-idea people that we meet.
mm.
But I think it's a different skill set than like what it takes to be good at pre-seed.
Mm, totally. I like the direction that you're thinking. So basically, essentially building other supporting system to kind of like expand your network as well as like kind of like figuring
Yep.
out the founder's ability before you kind of commit capital into
Mm-hmm.
whatever they're building. So I think that's definitely a really interesting like direction to think about. Like, so I know that like I just talked about like the fundraising part, but like also about like building a fund. So essentially, like you mentioned this couple times on other shows, like essentially there are three jobs, right? Like you have to raising the capital, you have to investing and do the investing job, and then there's like running a small business firm. And like essentially, like now, like we just talked about the IR sort of program. So like basically that's like the future of the fund, right? Like, so when you're getting bigger, like, when you're expanding your team, you have like a couple people on your team that are doing, financial work, controller or like CFO, as well as like there's, a couple people on the investing team. When you're thinking about like making your firm more, basically expanding your firm, not everybody can just go on to be a 6 tomorrow. I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
what are your step-to-step thinking process when you're thinking about like the next 10 years for your firm?
I think this is where it's funny. There's so many Medium and blog posts about the investing side of the job and even
Mm-hmm.
the fundraising job. Nobody writes about the firm building management side because it's messy.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's no blueprint, it ends up being very personal,
Mm-hmm.
driven largely by like what kind of firm do you want to build?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to be like Elad and have like a solo capitalist fund that's like huge, or do you want to be like A16Z? Like what, like, because what you want to, there's no right answer for what you want to build.
Mm-hmm.
It's really just like deciding on what you want to build puts a set of constraints around what you can do. And this is the area where I've probably been the most aggressive in seeking out mentorship is in these new, like, for example, right now I do all the investor relations at Precursor.
Mm-hmm.
I've been talking to a bunch of my friends at bigger firms. I'm like, hey, you don't do your own IR. How do you handle IR? Not the like sexiest topic in the world, incredibly top of mind as you scale your fund and the number of LPs and funds you have to report on grows. I'll tell you another one. Promotions and like thinking about, particularly on the investment team, how do you think about promoting people and like what are the quantitative and qualitative standards? That's an area where I've gone really deep with a lot of people at much bigger firms who've been doing this for a much longer period of time to understand how do they think about it
Mm-hmm.
and like how have they gotten to a place where they have a plan and a program, and what are the pros and cons of that program? And most importantly, how much, if any of that, do I want to import into Precursor? And the range is like all of it to none of it. And I think the firm building stuff gets hard because at some point you have to choose what you want to build. And once you choose, like, for example, if you're like, I want to make a multi-partner firm that's multi-generational, that creates a whole set of activities that you have to do. If you're just like, I want to be a solo capitalist and I'm going to shut this thing down as soon as I'm done with it, there's a bunch of things you don't have to do. And I think the hardest thing is like, you spend so much time in the early days just trying to survive. You wake up one day and you're like, well, I've survived, and now I have to actually build. But what should I build? And like, you know, I've spent a lot of time in this in the last few years being just introspective and honest about like, what do I want? And your LPs will have an opinion about what they think you should do. Your friends will have an opinion about what they think you should do. The people on your team will have an idea. And ultimately, like, you as the founder and leader have to decide what kind of firm you want to build. And then you have to live with the consequences. Like I tell my friends all the time, there are definitely days where I'm like, oh, if I had 4 other partners, there's like a bunch of work I do I wouldn't have to do. But I also have 5 other people I'd have to talk to about every decision I make. It's just a trade-off.
One of the things that I found about your past experience is like you did like BD in a couple different roles. Do you feel like venture is like essentially like a BD job? And I also saw that you created like a gaming summit before, and then now you create equity summit with Mar, who is also a guest on our show recently. So I'm curious, like you created these like conferences, and how do you leverage these like outside activity to like basically expand your network or like your business?
I think part of the thing I get from a lot of these like say yes outside activities is I learn new skills that I don't learn in my day job at Precursor. And they end up being really, really valuable. Like the Equity Summit, something I spent a lot of time on with Mar and Katie. And like the logistical decisions we make around the Equity Summit, the content, and trying to build a conference experience for people that feels special. It's a lot of work. And thankfully we've got a great team, but it's not something I think about and work on at Precursor every day. But it also has made me acutely aware of when you get it right, it's pretty special. And I've taken that back to me at Precursor. I'm like, well, if we're going to do events for our portfolio companies, like this is the bar we should try to hit. We should try to make these experiences that feel kind of magical for people. And like, if we can't do that, I would question whether we should be doing it at all.
Do you feel like you would like, so like it forces you to kind of like get out of your comfort zone to meet a lot of people that are like helping your business? Or do you feel like it's more of in general, like it's like a really just like maintaining the relationship with people? How does it like translate into like a business experience for you? And I feel like those are all things that kind of making you unique. And then back to the MVCA thing, like, you know, I don't really know how to be the board chair of MVCA. What does that entail? But like, I feel like it, you know, it's not like a everybody job, right? Like, you know, you don't really see that on everybody's resume. I guess like, how do you quickly accelerate your venture career to be ahead of a lot of people?
I think the other thing I'll say is like, the other thing about saying yes to stuff that's like kind of scary that you haven't done before is you just get used to learning how to do things you haven't done before, which I think like learning how to do new things, and maybe that's why I'm a generalist investor. Learning, I think generally as a life skill, the ability to quickly pick up a new task or set of responsibilities is incredibly valuable. Like I'm on the board of the opera. I've been on the board of the San Francisco Opera for a long time. I didn't know very much about the opera when I joined the
No
board.
way, really? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Like my bad for not researching that part.
No, it's fine. I was like, I have to learn how the San Francisco Opera Association works. I don't know.
To be frank, you are on a lot of board. I literally saw your resume. There was like 15 pages board member long,
it's
but
a lot. But I think for all of these things, like I didn't know anything about the Equity Summit. I mean, I'd been to the event, but I didn't know what it would take to make it be a special, awesome event until I joined the planning team. And then I was like, oh, this is what it takes. This is the level of effort required to produce an awesome event. Got it.
What are some of your learnings there, like to hosting these events and then like doing these extracurricular activity? What
It's
is like
really
being on the opera board look like? Do you have to sing all the time or
no, thank God I don't have to sing. They'd kick me off if I had to sing.
oh my God.
You know, the biggest lesson I've taken away, and this definitely does impact the way I run Precursor, is like the impact of having the people who are in charge of something really care about the quality of the end product has a disproportionately large outcome on the quality of the end product. And Jeff really cared about Uncork. I really care about Precursor. I really care about the Equity Summit. I really care about Screen Door. And I think what I've learned is that like attention to detail, a commitment to quality, and like a vision for what a good product looks like, it's actually a useful life skill because it means you like don't end up tolerating a lot of mediocrity in any domain of your life. And when you get involved with things, you come to them with the mindset that like I can make this thing better. Or I can build something that other people like the conference business I started. I'd never produced a conference in my whole life.
Mm.
I'd never been involved in event production. And we got that thing to about a couple thousand people a year. And so at some point, you're just like, I can learn new things. I can learn new things and I can get good at them. But it all starts from the same place, which is like, what would an amazing outcome for this experience look like? And like, what do I have to learn how to do in order to produce
Mhm.
that outcome?
Totally. When you're talking about producing the outcome, one thing I was thinking was, how do you produce the best outcome for your fund? I know that 1 year you invest in over 70 deals, and like, how do you engineer a successful fund?
It's really hard. I think you have to really know what you're looking for in terms of founders. I think you have to be humble enough to know that like you don't know everything and that like some if you continue to pick great founders working on good problems. What I tell my investors is we're going to pick 100 companies per fund. If I don't have a couple in there that work, you should question my ability. 100 is enough companies. It's probably not ownership. It's probably selection at that point. And
Mhm.
thus far, I'm pleased with our track record. But I also tell myself, like, I can't will these companies to be bigger than they are. So if I back somebody and it turns out the market opportunity is small, that's my fault. I made a mistake. I can't like browbeat that company into becoming a bigger company just because I want it to be bigger. It doesn't work that way.
Mm. Overall, I feel like you have just like accomplished so much. I have like 400 other questions for you, but I definitely don't want to like overwhelm you with like a bunch of stuff. And maybe like in the end, I'm like, I guess like one last real question is like, you have a really successful career. Who do you look up to as like, let's say like someone you aspire to be? Would you aspire to be like a Mark Andreessen, or like what are some of your ideal like icons that you kind of like think?
Um, I really respect what Kirsten's built at Forerunner. I
Mhm.
think it's really impressive. I really respect the brand that Josh Koppelman's built at First Round. I think he
Mhm.
like redefined in many ways like what seed could be and kind of like forced the whole category to really level up. I don't have any aspirations to build like a big enterprise. I have total respect for the people who can run, six and 700, like what Mark and Ben do and what Roloff does. I have total respect for them. Like that's sort of not my aspiration. And I look up to the homebrew guys, like they're my friends. And like most of the people I admire are people who built brand new franchises fairly quickly and who
Mhm.
I think like are really smart people pursuing like great opportunities and who I think are building firms that really reflect their values.
Mm. I'm also curious, like, because of you have hired people for your own farm, like when you're expanding your team, what are some things that you would look for people on your team?
Some of these sound cheesy. A positive attitude is really, really, really important. It's like really important.
Mhm.
Intellectual curiosity, very, very important. And I have to get some sense on the investment side that the person has good judgment.
Mhm.
It's kind of hard. Like good judgment is a little ephemeral, but like And then at the end of the day, pre-seed is basically a judgment-based job.
Mm-hmm. For
And
sure.
excellent judgment. Doesn't work without that.
How do you define excellent judgment?
I
This
look
will
at a
be the
lot of the
last
other
question.
decisions they've made in their life,
Mhm.
where they work, where they went to school, if they're married, how they chose their partner. I don't know, I'm trying to get a sense of like, how does this person make important decisions?
Okay, where are the last like 1 minute fire round for you? So like one question is like, what's your favorite book?
Founders at Work by Jessica Livingston, probably my favorite book.
Oh, I love that book. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Probably Stephen Mandel, who was like my day-to-day manager at In-Q-Tel.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh man, definitely Barack Obama. That would be fun.
What would you do outside of work?
I cook a lot.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Like, what do you cook?
Everything.
Everything?
I cook a lot.
What's your like favorite dish to cook?
I do a lot of meats on the smoker. That's
Mhm.
a big focus for me.
Oh, wow. What?
No, I like cooking is very relaxing to me. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I love cooking and food in general. Well,
Mhm.
thank you so much, Charles, for coming on
Thank
the
you
show
for
today.
having me.
Thanks for tuning into Smart Venture Podcast. If you learned something from the episode or even just mildly tolerated me, please subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. I promise I will keep bringing you more successful, insightful interviews and insider tips about startups. Remember, sharing is caring. So tell your friends to listen too, or enemies, I won't judge. Until next time, keep venturing smartly.